Hajiah Shakila binti Muhammad Syafi'i.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Nurina Shida binti Muhammad Nashro.
My name is Nur Aisyah binti Nizamuddin.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Azika binti Zanuddin.
Hi, my name is Nur Amira binti Amri.
Hello and Assalamualaikum. As you can see, the previous video is about news in Philippines that having an inflation and unemployment problems. Why this could be happen? So me and my member group will presenting about the problems that face it in Philippines. Before that, let me introduce myself. My name is Siti Nur Hazira binti Yusaini. I will present the introduction of Philippines. Under the leadership of President Benigno Aquino III, the Philippines was followed by Rodrigo Duterte, who, as demonstrated by Moto Konishi, country director of the World Bank during 2013 Philippines Development Forum, slowly but steadily emerged as a rising tiger. The Philippines has been catapulted by clean governance, good administration, growing infrastructure, and policy efforts on a path of faster growth. This research adds to the growing literature aimed at expanding the relationship between unemployment, inflation, and the rates of economic growth. Using data from the Philippines from 1961 to 2009 for a longer and more up-to-date study period. The relationship from a hearing can serve as a reference for both fiscal and monetary policy. The purpose of determining whether the Philippines support the Okan Law is to examine whether Philippines jobs and inflation data are consistent with the Phillips curve in order to investigate stronger predictors of unemployment between inflation and the rates of economic growth, and to determine whether inflation and the rate of economic growth together are rational predictor of unemployment. Since the Philippines has a young, growing English-speaking population, big overseas remittances, and households that in among ASEAN lowest, the future holds promise. The Philippines has an estimated population of 94 million inhabitants, about 33% of which are under 15 years of age. The Philippines is rated as a middle-income nation with an average US $41,999 per capita income in the Philippines, yet as many as 25.6% of the population remaining below the poverty line in 2012. Although the unemployment rate is 7%, the International Organization for Migrants (IOM) Country Migration Survey 2013 in the Philippines raised the gross domestic product by 6.6% in 2012. However, the major industry of the Philippines include manufacturing and agribusiness, pharmaceuticals, shipbuilding, electronics, and semiconductors are focal fields of engineering, mining, and mineral processing. One of the most lucrative pharmaceutical markets in the Asia-Pacific region is the Philippines. The Philippines is also richly endowed with metallic resources, and many foreign corporations have been drawn to its land by the region. Among them are BHP and Sumitomo Metal Mining Co. In addition, the arrival of foreign players are helped the country capitalize on its capacity for shipbuilding. After China, South Korea, and Japan, the ASEAN nation is the fourth largest shipping area. Philippines were the 34th largest economy in the world with an estimated 2017 gross domestic product in nominal of 348.593 billion. The Philippines export to the main trade partner country of the United States, Japan, China, Singapore, South Korea, the Netherlands, Hong Kong, Germany, Taiwan, and Thailand. They are exporting semiconductors and electronics, railway, machinery, clothes, chopper, goods, petroleum, coconut oil, and fruits. The Philippines economy as a new developed world is shifting from an agriculture base to a greater focus on services and manufacturing. The agriculture sector accounts for 30% of jobs and contributes to 40% of GDP of the country, total labor of 40.813 million. The manufacturing sector accounts for 40% of jobs and contributes 30% of GDP, while 56% of GDP is provided for 70% of employees involved in the service sector. Subsequently, the Philippines' economic growth rising in the fourth quarter of lamented to 3 years low in 2018. It giving the central bank a justification to continue raising interest rates. The Philippine government is hopeful that the economy will rebound in the coming quarters with the hope that inflation will decrease more this year and in turn help lower global oil prices. The goal set for growth in 7 to 8%. However, Capital Economics described the prospect of a steady growth surge in 2019 as slim, partly due to a slower rate of planned government infrastructure expenditure. A sustainable and harmonious growth of the sector of agriculture, manufacturing, and service is necessary for any economy to emerge. When these are achieved, changes follow very predictably in tertiary sector of the economy. In terms of economic and social growth, the Philippines has lagged behind its more prosperous Southeast Asian and East Asian neighbors for many decades. All those days has ended. Today, the Philippines seem to be squarely on the road of prosperity and growth.
I want to talk about background inflation and unemployment problem in Philippines. Inflation and unemployment are part of the microeconomics problems that are a major concern for countries in the world, including the Philippines. Inflation and unemployment, which are too high, will have an impact on the country's economic fundamentals. Low inflation and unemployment are sometimes unfavorable, as well as low inflation will have an impact on the productivity of the country's industry. This is due to the deflation of the price of goods produced, so this problem will later have an impact on the reduction of employment, which will only increase unemployment. It can be said that inflation and unemployment are short-term and long-term problems that have always been a spectrum for the economy of a country. It is said that the good and bad of a country's economy can be seen from the level of inflation in the country. In the Philippines, there have been a lot of inflation and unemployment problems due to certain factors. Therefore, it has caused a deterioration in the national economy. Economic Planning Secretary Ernesto Pernia said household consumption should recover this year due to declining inflationary pressure amid declining international oil price and a reduction in local retail price for rice. Philippine statistics show that the Consumer Price Index inflation rose 2.3% in September from the same period a year earlier, but slightly slower than August inflation as much as 2.4% as price pressure is on the highly balanced non-alcoholic food and beverage index. This inflation, which excludes food and fuel price, was 3.2% compared to 3.1% in August. Inflation in January-September averaged 2.5% below the midpoint of the official target range of 2% to 4% for the year. However, he expressed concern over the impact of trade disputes between the United States and China on the global economy. In December, the Philippines Central Bank maintained its key interest rate unchanged to allow for 5 consecutive increases with a total of 175 basis points, and is succeeded in stimulating the country's economy. Unemployment in the Philippines is forecast at 10% in July 2020. In April 2020, it was higher than in the same month last year at 5.4%, but lower than the peak at 17.7%. It is projected that the unemployed in July 2020 will be 4.6 million, more than 2.2 million in the same time frame last year, but 2.7 million below the previous 3 months. In the metro alone, Manila has seen some 929,000 employed, followed by the province of Catapasan, south of Manila, 886,000 employed, while the central province of Luzon has a further 550,000 pupils. In the second quarter of 2020, gross domestic product growth decreased by 16.5%, the lowest quarterly growth since 1981. Factors that caused this unemployment were caused by the pandemic of COVID-19 in the world. It is a statistic for inflation. October 2020 saw the annual inflation rate in the Philippines rise to a 3-month high of 2.5%, up from 2.3% a month early, as the nation further reopened its economy as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. The key pressure was raised by food and non-alcoholic drinks, 2.1% versus 1.5% in September. Alcoholic beverage and cigarettes, 11.3% versus 12.9%. Clothing, 1.7% versus 1.8%. Housing, 0.9% versus 1.2%. Furniture and routine maintenance, 3.7% versus 3.7%. Well-being, 2.7% versus 2.8%. Transportation, 7.9% versus 8.3%, 2.4% versus 2.3%. In comparison, recreation and culture costs have decreased further, negative 0.6% versus negative 0.5%. Monthly consumer price rose 0.3%, also the highest in 3 months, following a 0.1% rise in September. It is a statistic unemployment in July 2020. Philippines unemployment rate fell to 10% compared to 17.7% previously recorded in April 2020. Philippines unemployment rate is revised regularly, available from July 1982 to July 2020. At an average rate of 8.5%, the data hit an all-time high of 70.7% in April 2020, and a record low of 4.5% in October 2019. The data are recorded by CIC data. In the most recent estimate, the population of the Philippines reached 109.58 million in December 2020. The labor force participation rate of the country increased to 61.9% in July 2020.
So now I will talk about inflation and employment in Philippines. Inflation. First, cost-push inflation. Cost-push inflation occurs when labor supply shortage of raw materials, crop failures or capital raise the cost of production and reduce aggregate supply, thus increasing the price level. Aggregate demand remains the same, but because there are less product and services, the producer will charge more for the unit. In Philippines, cost-push inflation happens in the Philippines as inflation rise at 2.7% in July 2020. Since the previous month, as transport rates are higher utility costs, the price index has risen. Quarantine protocol introduced by the government have driven transport price higher, as drivers are no longer allowed to share rides with fellow travelers. Although energy bills have also become significantly more expensive due to increased costs for water services. December 2018, price reported a 5.1% rise from the same month in 2017, slipping below the industry forecast for a 5.6% increase. Meanwhile, core inflation reversed 4.7% of post-slower growth, compared to 5.1% in previous months, allaying concerns of deeply entrenched inflationary pressures. Food products is increased price by 6.7% in December 2018, down from 8.0% in the previous month, as the 4Q harvest season and grain imports helped to normalize supply condition. Transport costs were another significant cause of deceleration, with inflation more than halving, showing 4.0% rise, the slower rate of inflation since January 2017. Finally, utilities also saw a declining trend with price gains of 4.1% compared to 4.2% in November. Demand pull inflation. Demand pull inflation is a keynote in Keynesian economics that explains the consequence of imbalance in aggregate supply and demand. When aggregate demand in the country is substantially higher than aggregate supply, prices are increasing. As AD equals to C plus I plus G plus X minus M, any increase of these variables will cause aggregate demand to rise. In Philippines, food inflation was 2.9%, up from 2.5% on the run-off impact of crop damage caused by twin typhoons at the end of 2019, the volcanic eruption of 2020. Meanwhile, excise taxes imposed on alcoholic drinks and petroleum goods raised transport price 3.0% from 2.2%. And on alcoholic beverage and tobacco, 19.2% from 18.4%. As governments around the world develop several ties between the health crisis of COVID-19 and global and local food system, they are considering range of policy decisions or already implementing preventive measures in protect food supply. In most situations, these steps are taken separately and with little respect for the global systems and their independence. Governments understandably feel a sense of urgency to act. This is attributed to the rapid spread of the health epidemic and the exponential rate of human coronavirus infection. Now I will talk about unemployment in Philippines. The first one is cyclical. Cyclical unemployment is triggered by the process of recession of the business cycle. That's when demand for goods and services is dropping sharply. It pushes companies to lay off a significant number of employees to cut costs. Due to downswing of the trade cycle, aggregate demand falls, and via the multiplier effect, national income falls further. Hence, consumption falls, production reduces. Companies may close down and workers are laid off, resulting in cyclical employment. Cyclical employment is a serious form of unemployment as it usually creates more unemployment. This can further lowering demand because laid-off workers now have less money to buy the things they need. However, quarantine steps have shut down schools and most government offices and private institutions in Metro Manila and the entire of Luzon. The second one is structural unemployment. Structural unemployment occurs when there are changes in the economy that create an imbalance between the skills of employees and the skills required by employers. A change in the trend of demand results in a change in preference, a change in the demographic profile, or the advent of new goods or innovation may have rendered the current product redundant, which is why the skill of employees are no longer sufficient for the jobs available. Low of quality of job available in Philippines. Just 58% of workers, both in formal and informal employment, were in what was described as paying jobs. Of the rest, 28% were self-employed with no guaranteed wages, and 11% worked on family-owned farms or other business where, according to official statistics, they generally receive food and lodging but did not receive any real cash. The third one is frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment refers to the short-term employment which happens when people look for jobs or people have their jobs either voluntary or asked to go and are employed for a period of time while they are looking for a new job. These include new entrants such as school leavers, fresh graduates, and re-entrants such as people who quit their jobs for a better position or higher wages, or former homemakers. This happens in Philippines when during this pandemic, more sector was difficult to pay their wages, and most of workers changed their works temporarily to continue their life. The Philippine unemployment rate 8.7% in October, equivalent to around 3.8 million jobless Filipinos amid the coronavirus crisis. Number 4 is seasonal unemployment. Seasonal unemployment occurs when a particular commodity cannot be generated during a certain season. As a result, many employees are temporarily put on a short-term basis during some periods of the year. It is result of daily variation in weather conditions, climate change, or shift in demand patterns. This happens in construction workers who are unable to fish during the monsoon season or in winter, and in tourism workers who are unemployed during off-peak times in some tourist areas. April 2020, the number of unemployed people was 7.2 million, resulting in an unemployment rate of 17.6%. This is the record high for the unemployment rate, illustrating the influence of the global downturn on the Philippine labor market as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Number 5, technological unemployment arose from a labor-savvy manufacturing process of emerging technology that involve employees with different skill sets. Staff who have lost their employment will need to learn new skills, and the government should have delivered retaining or retraining services. The January 2018 Labor Force survey found that 27.6% of Filipino employees are engaged in basic occupations and perform simple and repetitive tasks using handheld tools and significant physical effort. It's obvious that the bulk of the job gains come from this occupation group. They are accompanied by those performing managerial position, 16.3%.
So today I will talk about cause of inflation and unemployment in Philippines. First thing first, I will talk cause of inflation in Philippines. What we know, every country have their inflation and unemployment because of the economy or something else, right? So in the Philippines, there is also the occurrence of such a problem. One of the cause of inflation in the Philippines is because of the rising global price of petroleum products. As the primary cause of our high inflation rates, the government cited international innovation. Because of that, at present, the Philippines has the highest inflation rates, overtaking the inflation rate of our other ASEAN neighbor that used to be higher than our. Then, the tax reform package came into effect. Naturally, when we tax basic commodities such as gas, electricity, sugar, and so on, the outcome is inflationary. This is because of they are directly influenced by the price of essential commodities. Besides that, peso exchange rate also cause of inflation in Philippines. The Philippine peso exchange rate has also depreciated by about 8% since the beginning of this year, and is ending to inflationary pressure, causing commodity price to rise highest. Interest rate increased because of inflation, as interest rate related to inflation rates economy growth is also slowed down by inflation. In addition, Philippines also have the problem of unemployment, so the cause of unemployment in Philippines is overpopulation. Unemployment occurs when obtaining work is difficult for a person who is actively present employed. The unemployment are those aged 15 and over who testify the following requirement, and there is no pay available for job seekers and job seekers without job and without any credit. The most likely cause of unemployment in the Philippines is the unavailability of work. With a rising population of approximately 8 million of jobs are required, and only a few can be sure of getting one. Lack of education is the most cause of employment. With the rising demands of the fast developing world, when you are not a graduate with a specific skills or course, it will be very hard to find employment. Though the Philippines is a literate country, since even married ladies nowadays are required to have at least 1 or 2 years in college, it is not enough to be able to meet the qualification of most demand jobs. Last but not least, labor force over supply employer to take on available work, and graduates are still taking up common but previously high in demand college courses. These graduates hold skills that are not high in demand in the job market after graduation. As such, a skill imbalance exists. So that's all from me. Thank you.
I will talk about impact of inflation for a country in terms of social and economical. Philippine economic growth fell to a 3-year low in 2018 despite rising in the fourth quarter, giving its central bank a reason to continue raising interest rate. Philippine country recorded a full-year growth of 6.2%, not exceeding its government declining revisions target of 6.5 to 6.9%, and this will impact the Philippine country in terms of social and economical. Inflation in the Philippines will influence the economy in number of ways, whether positive or negative. The severity of advance impact depends on whether inflation is anticipated or unanticipated in that region. Anticipated inflation is inflation for which people in Philippines are more or less ready. Everyone around the Philippines will integrate this predicted higher degree of inflation into their plans. They prefer to spend more and save more, but if they do not spend more, their capital will be worth less in the long term. Expenditure and investment will help the Philippine economy. This moderate inflation is supposed to produce a positive result as it increases business demand due to high income and increased output, thereby lowering unemployment. However, anticipated inflation might also have negative consequences on the Philippine economy, such as high projected inflation in that country, and their country may try to avoid hanging on the income. They invest their funds as soon as they earn it. Hyperinflation is very challenging for them to accurately forecast as the overall inflation rate range by year to year. Another negative impact of anticipated inflation in Philippines is a loss in the quality of life in their populations. Inflation has decreased actual buying power and real wages, and leaving the people of their country become poor. Next is the anticipated inflation that will impact the country of the Philippines. These inflations arrive as a sudden or tends to come before they have had time to thoroughly react to its existence. It triggers the following result for the Philippines, which is the redistribution of income wealth. The beneficiaries of continued anticipated inflations are the businessmen in their country who earn more money from rising price. Then the debtor, as the buying power of capital are diminished by the time they pay off their debt. With inflations, while debtors refund a certain sum of money, they pay less from terms of goods and services. Then the value of money at a time where they repay the loan is less when they first borrow the money. Losses of continuing anticipated inflations in the Philippines are salary earners and income earners, as their actual worth of profit falls when their incomes or profit are slow to respond to rising costs of goods and services. Pensioners in that regions are the most badly impacted as their wage is fixed and their profit will decline with inflation. Money saved are infected, and those with fixed or saving account will suffer as the buying power of their saving declines. Creditors have also been affected that if the inflation rate increases the maximums of interest paid or the debt, the buying power of the remaining balance of the debt will be diminished. Another impact of anticipated inflations in the Philippines is the deterred spending and saving as a result of concerns about portional inflations. Inflation increased the portional cost of keeping income, decreased savings, and distort customer conduct by forcing them to spend and hoard more. Inflation also distorts the actions of Philippine companies and makes long-term preparations impossible. Philippines firms can redirect money from capital assets to speculations. Trade unions may struggle for better wages and strike, which will have an impact on their country's output. Furthermore, in an extreme structural inflation or hyperinflation, money becomes less valuable as it lacks its ability to act as a means of trade and a store of valuable in the Philippines. In the case of hyperinflation, use of money will totally break down and lead to the displacements of the barter system in that regions. After that, balance payments are already making an impact in the Philippines. Higher inflations make Philippine exports seems to be relatively expensive and imports tend to be much cheaper. The trade balance will also have loss. It will also have an impact on workers in the export industry of the Philippines. Then here the impact of employment in Philippine country. First, this impact will affect in individual which is employment. Are unable to earn money to pay mortgage or to pay rent may lead to homeless. Employment people have higher rates of medication use, poor diet, anxiety, depression, suicide, and drug use. If employment persists for a long period, individuals will lose their job skills, causing a loss in human capital. It will also lead them to radical social and political activities by increasing crime rates. Last but not least is social impact. Employment results in lower moral and human suffering. This family unit will be affected if the sole breadwinner loses his or her job. Social problem arise if the employment turns to drugs or crime.
I will present about how Philippines solve the inflation and unemployment using monetary and fiscal policy. Monetary policy is the supervision and regulation of the supply of money by a central bank such as the Philippines Banking Center and Filipinas BSP. The government is doing this to be able to control inflation and stabilize the currency. Central banks use monetary policy to lower unemployment and avoid recession. All central banks have some tool of monetary policy in common. Open market operation consists of trades for repurchase and reverse repurchase of rights, transaction, and swap for foreign exchange. They buy and sell member banks, government bonds, and other securities. The Banking Center use open market operation to buy government security with a dedication to sell it back on a defined future date in purchasing transactions and at a fixed interest rate. The payment of the Banking Center and Filipinas BSP raise reserve balance and extend the money supply in the Philippines. The open market Banking Center buy the public government security to improve the supply of capital. However, BSP can expand or contract the amount of reserve on the banking system by purchasing bonds, bills, and other financial instruments on the open markets and eventually affect the supply of money by the Philippines. Consumption will thus rise and cyclical unemployment will be reduced. Reserve requirements are the portion of deposit that banks must hold in cash, either in their vault or on deposit at the central banks. A decrease in reserve requirement is expansionary because it increases the funds available in the banking system to lend to consumers and businesses. Philippines, low inflation made the central bank space for reducing reserve requirements threshold although the financial system has already given ample cash. According to Banking Center and Filipinas, small companies had 127 27.3 billion peso in loan as of October 22, while large company accounted for 27.9 trillion pesos. In 2020, the central bank revises its 2% growth projection in the settlements of overseas employees. Last year, BSP lowered some banks' reserve requirement by a total of 400 basis points. The reserve ratio for universal and commercial banking banks now stand at 40% compared to 5% and 3% for trade and rural banks. The central bank is going to advise commercial banks to increase interest rate on public deposit. The high interest rates would enable the public to make more saving and to raise the amount of saving in order to minimize overall demand and price level. In order to run its monetary activities, the BSP officially implemented the Interest Rate Corridor (IRC) scheme on 3 June 2016. The IRC is a short-term market rate mechanism for BSP policy. The reverse repurchase rate of the night is consists of a rate at which central banks loan to the banks and of a rate which they raise deposits. The BSP reduced their deposit interest rate and encouraged public spending. Low interest rate allow businesses to borrow less. This enabled them to recruit sufficient employees to meet growing demand. Policy refer to the policy used by government to stabilize the economy, primarily by controlling tax and government spending level and allocation. In order to accomplish those objectives, fiscal policy are often used in combination with monetary policy. Unemployment reducing is the aim of fiscal policy. The instruments would either be to increase government spending or to minimize taxes. Government spending is the overall government spending for a given period of time on a good and service. Inflation is the sustained rise over a given period of time in the general price level. Higher government spending would contribute to inflation for demand pool. In fiscal policy, the BSP control inflation either by reducing private expenditure or by reducing government spending, or by using both. It lowers private spending by raising private enterprise taxes. BSP decreases the inflation management expenditure while private consumption is higher. The Philippines, subsidizing employers who hire unemployed employees will help tackle the issue of unemployment. However, depending on the amount of subsidy the government receives, this approach will put a strain on the government budget. For businesses that recruit unemployed employees, job incentive may be offered the government. The cost of production for businesses decrease with a subsidy as the price of each unit of human capital decrease. Employers would also be more eager and able to attract more jobs and raise the number of employees that they are willing to recruit. This raises the workforce size and the number of vacancies, thus helping to minimize unemployment. Taxes impact the economy, deciding how much money the government has to invest on some place and how much people need to spend. For instance, if the government wants to increase consumer demand, taxes may be decreased. A drop in taxes gives families extra money that is anticipated by the government in turn to be spent on goods and services and thus improve the entire economy. The government of the Philippines will approach a bill which will reduce corporate and personal income taxes in the country. The decrease rate for low and middle income payers are projected once enforced, and a corporate income tax CIT will be reduced from its present level of 30% to 25% under the tax amendment for inclusive growth bills. Furthermore, a bracket of personal income tax (PIT) will be adjusted for inflation. The Philippines has taken a variety of other steps to bolster its economic climate. In March of 2015, the Philippines Bureau of Internal Review (BIR) released regulation to introduce a 30-man pay and other 42 Philippine peso price in the tax expansion limit from the previous 300 Philippine peso amount. The new guideline applied to public as well as private sector employees and are valid retroactively from January 1, 2015. More than that, 1 million workers are expected to benefit from tax reform.
In these problems, the conclusion is Philippines determine whether there exists a relationship between economic growth, inflation, and unemployment in the Philippines. Widely recognized theories have posited that these macroeconomics indicators are related and some facets of this relationship have been investigated in the Philippine setting. However, the inclusion of unemployment and inflation are caused by pandemic and profession. Unemployment is adversely impacted by the Philippines' economic development. However, there have been historical times where the association between shift in the unemployment rate and economic activity has not been the cases such as through recession and expansions. The legislature must also only be considered a rule of thumb and not a structural feature of the economy. The study findings have indicated that the Phillips curve in the Philippines has a negative effect on unemployment, while not statistically important on inflation. However, the first-order lags of inflation proved to be significantly related with unemployment. The Phillips curves reflect the trade-off between unemployment and inflation rates. The utility is in policy making and most notably in inflation forecasting. The perception that monetary policy has an impact on wages is inextricably related to the belief that inflation and unemployment trade-off. They further clarified that wage labor market conditions have an effect on consumer price inflation, while monetary policy may have been an impact on the inflation channel unemployment rates. Monetary policy impacts the rates of unemployment only through this channel. In the meantime, they also argue that monetary policy mechanisms have an effect on the unemployment rates. It is also considered beneficial to systematically pursue a clearer interpretation by policymakers and economists of the relationship between inflation of the unemployment rate in order to better align fiscal and monetary policies. Last but not least, in 2020, have given big impact to Philippines people. The pandemic COVID-19 is causes the people in the Philippines to experience job loss due to employers not be able to pay workers' salary. Well, this is due to when COVID-19 had to be instructed to sit at home to prevent the spread of the disease. Although it has a huge impact on every individual who has to be laid off, it has been widely acknowledged among economists that knowledge of what level of unemployment rate will trigger high inflation, which can be harmful to the investment climate, is desirable to both policymakers and capital investors. Thus, this relationship is more than academic interest and can be useful to investors in forecasting future inflation. Overall, it was observed that the pandemic and the occupation were positively linked to unemployment. Furthermore, the positive relationship between unemployment and its first-order latency was statistically important. The optimistic jobs-led partnership calls for a more immediate and drastic fiscal and monetary policy that solve this issue, as indicated by its coefficient of determination. The model proved to have a reasonably good fit for the results. That's all from us about the problems of inflation and unemployment in Philippines. May they can recover and continue to progress as usual. Thank you for your attention. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you and Assalamualaikum.